Welcome back to the Gruber Morning Show. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Good morning and welcome to our podcast.
I hope you're enjoying the background image today. It was another one of those artificial intelligence rendered images of a studio in a high rise with the cityscape behind it. And this one actually reminds me a lot of Phoenix, Arizona. We get these sunsets all the time.
Oh, yeah, I love that sunset there. I think it's notable too. It looks like there's a picture on the very back wall that is an exact duplicate image of the sunset that's coming in through the windows.
Very cool. Yeah.
It's very cool.
YouTube, Pablo Damon says, Gruber Motors is to EVs what Cellular One was to mobile phones. Pete reminds me of Craig McCaw. And somebody looked up Craig McCaw, and it turns out that, he was definitely notable in the cell phone industry. And he's worth $2.2 billion. And I said, well, I've got a couple years to go. He's 2 years older than I am. So
on YouTube, we have EV Fan says, Cellular One. Wow, throwback. I just watched the BlackBerry movie. It was decent.
Okay, all right.
And Smuggler, good morning, Smuggler. He's back this morning. He says, I like the new look.
And Smuggler, we're improving the experience for all the platforms. We have Instagram back online with us. We have TikTok now, who is able to see the image behind us. And we're still working on the being able to see the guests. Like TikTok yesterday was unable to see our Zoom guest. And it's improving all the time.
TikTok was.
They were. Who was not able
Instagram.
to see?
Instagram was not able to see, but they were able to hear our
Richard's
guests.
got an update on that, actually.
Oh, go
Correct.
for it.
Yeah. So we are looking at the Yellow Duck software. It looks like they had an update, so we may be able to get back on that for the full view for Instagram pretty soon here. We have to look into all the nuances with it, but that is on the table now. Speaking of Instagram, I do need to go adjust the camera real quick, so excuse me.
Okay. So everybody, you're going to see the back of Richard's head for a minute. While he's doing that, we had one follow-up. On Tuesday, we were talking about ghost mode. And Addicted had come to us and asked us if we knew anything about ghost mode, and we had a little bit of conversation back and forth, but we promised that we would research a little bit more about ghost mode. So I did that. And the Ghost module is really what is, rather than Ghost mode. It's a module that plugs into your Model 3 or your Model Y.
And it's limited to just those two Teslas?
Yes, it appears to be limited to just those two Teslas. Not just that, but it's limited to those two Teslas that have the dual motors.
Okay.
There is one motor type. If you go up under the car, you look at the motor part number, either looking through the rear wheel, under the wheel well, or sometimes you can go up under the car and look at it. There's one motor type that many of the dual motor Model 3s and Model Ys have, and this motor is actually the performance motor.
Mm-hmm.
But it hasn't been tuned as a performance motor for these cars. It's been tuned as a standard motor, and it's a dual motor configuration. So the Ghost module is simply unlocking the performance mode that's already there. So it sounds like it's a legit module, that it will actually improve the horsepower and responsiveness and so on and so forth. That's kind of exciting. At the same time, my speculation is that Tesla would probably take kind of a dim view on that particular modification, because these motors are in cars that are not designed as performance cars.
I see. One might argue that like the CPUs that you used to be able to overclock, for example.
Yeah.
You're actually driving that harder. It's going to run hotter. In this case, you have a latent ability that hasn't been woken up.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be interested to see what if there were warranty restrictions with this. You void warranty basically. What the reasons for that would be, because essentially you're unlocking something that's already there.
And that's a good point. And what I'm wondering is, were there other structural integrity or safety issues inside the car, other pieces of the firmware that are going to be operating outside of spec if a motor is running at 150 horse more, or that's a lot more torque and a lot more kilowatts that it's pulling than that car was necessarily designed to do in that case.
Good point. This is reminiscent of the Tesla's firm restrictions regarding upgrades to the Model S batteries. If you don't have a P100, for example, you cannot put a 100 kW battery pack in that car. And the reasons they cited was the very things that you said. It wasn't structurally built for that weight and for that battery.
Right.
There were, when we spoke to them a couple of years ago about this, there were things like airbag timing issues that were different with that larger battery pack, structural issues. It'll be interesting to see how Tesla responds to this, but in the meantime, it looks like somebody out there did some homework and found a way to boost performance.
Yeah, it sounds like, in spite of the potential manufacturer frowning on type of issues, it sounds like kind of a cool thing, actually.
Mm-hmm. Looks like we got a bunch of questions starting to stream in there at YouTube. Eric P. Welcome, Eric. He says, welcome to the Matrix Club. Yeah, okay.
Welcome, Eric.
And we always recommend that our audience puts on sunglasses as well. For those of you that joined us yesterday, we had a guest all the way from China, Hong Kong, China. Horrible time zone difference. It was like 1 o'clock his time in the morning. And but anyway, he obliged us and put sunglasses on. He saw the light.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. I think he's our third guest in a row that's done that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Ingemar Anderson, who had wrote "The Future Is Electric," came on our show and had his sunglasses on, and I think even before that, who was it that we had on?
I think Brandon was one of the younger guys that
Brandon
we had
was one of the younger
yeah.
ones. Tesla employee 195.
Oh, Jameson Cummings.
Yes. Even Jameson.
Uh-huh.
He had put on his sunglasses. So
even wore a Gruber Motor Company shirt.
Right. That's right. Smuggler also tells us that he popped in Tuesday and saw some of the podcast. Says it's looking great. And Smuggler sent us a couple of little gifts, a rose and a heart as well. Thank you, Smuggler. We really appreciate that.
Yeah. Welcome back. YouTube, Pablo Damon, he says, I had an Uncle Mel Gruber back in the late 60s from Piers, Minnesota. It's a great name, by the way. But I can safely say that the Gruber lineage, at least from my side of the family, came from Germany. And we were the first Grubers here. So although that is a very popular name over there, I remember driving on the Autobahn and my wife looks over at this truck going by, a semi, and it had 6-foot letters that said Gruber on the side. Very popular name back there. Facebook, Lewis McDonald. Welcome, Lewis. He says, hello from Chester, UK. How are we? We're doing well. Thank you.
Doing very well. Trucker Alistair has joined us again this morning. The sunglasses gentlemen are back in the house, he says. Now, I'm wondering, where do you think Trucker's at today? He was in Alabama a couple days ago. I think he was in Virginia yesterday.
And he also commented on the latest video that we did. We should probably talk about that out on YouTube.
Oh, yes, please.
Did a lot of research on this one, and we were curious. Is this notion of EV battery swapping legitimate? Does it make sense? And most recently, we found that yet another EV manufacturer is subscribing to that program, Fisker. NIO has already been doing it. And we believe they have 1,200 of these stations in China currently that are doing battery swapping. And at this point, I thought I'd turn it over to Richard. He was the editor that did a lot of work on this video. And if you have some bullet points you can share with us, Richard, I think the audience would enjoy that.
Sure, but I have to make sure I'm on par with everybody else first.
There you go. Yes, yeah, you definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting things about battery swaps, especially NIO's. They're kind of the pioneer of the technology. They didn't invent it, nor were they the first to try it. I think the most interesting thing that I found out was a company by the name of Better Place in Israel was the first to try it, and that was back in 2007. So this was
Wow.
way, way back in the day. Renault was their proponent. They actually released a few cars, one vehicle, the Fluence ZE, I believe it was, that had a running small network of battery swap stations for a time, and you know, very similar to the U.S. today, there just wasn't the demand. Neo picked up where they left off essentially, and began creating a network of battery swap stations in China. Everything that we've watched on, or everything that I've read up on it and watched it, people like the technology. That people that use it and find it convenient and useful. But there's a majority of people just don't see a necessity for it. So it was neat to dive into that and to look at all the pros and cons of it. You guys should definitely check out the video. There was one bit of misinformation in there that I can correct right now. In the video, Pete said that there was 200 swap stations in China. That was not the case. They're up to about 1,200 now. So there is a more established network there. So it seems like they're going to continue with that technology.
We were talking to Kyle Connor with Out of Spec Motoring. By the way, another great YouTube channel for those of you that enjoy EVs and information about EVs. And he actually was at a swapping station in Norway end of last year, and went through that process with, I believe, a Neo vehicle that he had. And then he had some definite opinions, which he's going to share with us, by the way. He's going to be one of our future guests on this podcast.
Right.
But yeah, he was, he's on the fence about the whole program as well, but he was giving us kind of an idea why these are popular in China and seemingly nowhere else, at least to that level. He said in China, a lot of people live in apartments. They do not have charging infrastructure, and they have a cultural predisposition to wanting a full tank of gas in their car at all times. Which, by the way, is completely different than my first wife. She used to fill that truck we had at least 3 times a week, because all she'd put in there was 3 to 5 gallons each time. And I would point out and say, wouldn't it be more effective and efficient if you filled it all the way to the top? Because you're going to end up doing that anyway within a week's period of time.
Sure.
With the amount of gas that you're buying.
Sure.
But, sometimes logic doesn't prevail with wives. And in that particular case, I never did get that message across adequately, I think. So anyway, that's one of the reasons they claim, is that no charging stations, and they're very popular there. If you're interested in the video, it is out on YouTube, and it's a pretty good treatise on whether these things are going to make it or not. And you know what? Something you said, that Better Place actually released these charging stations, swapping stations in 2007, right?
Correct. Well, Better Place was founded around 2007, where they began funding
Yeah,
to produce,
okay,
to
yeah.
establish.
Okay.
Now that makes
Okay.
more sense, because I was going to say the Tesla Roadster really didn't even get released until 2008. They were in production, of course, but they were prototypes basically. By 2008, they began to release them to the market.
Right.
By the way, interesting thing, we had a Tesla Roadster show up yesterday, and the customer had bought this Roadster from someone else that bought all of the charge cable adapters that came with the Roadster. And I had no idea there were so many. There must have been over a half a dozen of them.
Oh,
They were,
really?
30 amp twist lock, 30 amp straight blade, 20 amp, for all types of variations. And it reminded me that when the Roadster came out, there were no charging stations. And when you went on a trip, you went to a KOA campground, and you were never sure what kind of 240 volt or higher amperage type receptacles they had at those campgrounds. So Tesla used to make a whole suite of cables that you could purchase so that you were always prepared when you went to a KOA campground.
That way, if you go to the KOA, go to your neighbor's house, whatever, hey, I need to get to your laundry room, so
Right. And by the way, we get lots of questions about extension cords. You have to match the extension cord to the amperage on the plug. Had another customer that took the yellow Roadster charge cable, which is a 15 amp, usually on a 20 amp circuit, and they were using one of those 18 gauge extension cords and wondering why it got so hot and began to smell. You're going to see a big voltage drop across those. And of course, when you have a voltage drop, you have resistance, and the byproduct is heat.
Yes.
So it gets dangerous. But always match your amperage to your wire size. 10 gauge wire is 30 amp wire. That's the standard. And then, of course, watch your length. You're not going to be able to charge 100 feet. 25 feet is the most that they recommend. And the Roadster actually has a sensing circuit that will tell you if it sees an extension cord. It's looking at the voltage drop, basically.
I figured that, and those Roadster, the yellow charge cables, don't they have a GFI plug at the end as well for kind of the same reason?
They do, and that was for safety reasons. And those also need replacement every 5 years or so. There's a little circuit board inside, and they really do get stressed. So one of the other things we do when we have Roadsters come in, we ask the customer to send the yellow charge cable, and we retrofit it and put a new GFI plug on it for them.
Very nice. On Instagram, a click outside has a question for us asking how many cars are in for repair at your shop, and what's the average time for a repair?
We talked about this a bit yesterday, but on any given day, there are about 50 Roadsters, sometimes 50 plus, that are in, and they come and go every day. Right now, we have 2 Roadsters on their way in, and a couple left already this week. So there's a good turnaround. How long they spend there is dependent on the type of repair that we do, and there are a lot of variables there. If it's just a one-item repair, it could just be maybe a couple, 3 weeks. However, once they're here, now remember, people have shipped these oftentimes cross-country, and there's a huge expense involved with that. Transporters have gotten much more expensive since COVID. While they're here, we recommend you might as well get some upgrades done to that car. If you're having battery work done, that power electronics module has a lot of deferred maintenance in it. And if you wait for it to fail, you're going to end up with potentially burned circuit boards that are out of production and no longer available. So that typically will extend the time. What some Roadster customers do is they will winter their cars here. In the certain parts of the U.S., driving a Roadster in the middle of winter isn't really an ideal way to treat that car. So they usually winter here, and we do all of these upgrades, and then by spring, when driving weather comes back, they can enjoy their Roadster again.
Panopticon on TikTok tells us, thank you, Gruber Motors team, for making these podcasts possible. They're very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then YouTube, Pablo Damon says, all German lineage too. Back to Daman, Germany, early in the 1600s. Oh, wow, you go back further than I do. We trace back to around 1700, and our clan actually took Catherine the Great's offer. She was a Tsarina in Russia. Back then, the royals used to move around a bit, and just because you were in Russia didn't mean that you were Russian, but you were royalty there, and you ran the country. Well, Catherine the Great wanted to westernize Russia, which she felt was very backward, so she offered free land to the Germans in the Ukraine, of all places. So my folks are around the Zaporozhye region, which now, of course, is under Russian rule again, and the Kherson area, in that area. But what was interesting was, and I digress here, but I'll share this.
Yeah.
The whole intent was to get westernized, or to westernize Russia by having these cultures integrate into the Russian culture. It turns out that they really kept to themselves. So my mother says a German, everyone spoke German at home,
Okay.
right? And in the streets, you spoke Ukrainian. And in schools, because it was under Russian rule, the only language they were allowed was Russian. So she ended up being trilingual by the time, she was she had language skills. But so the original plan kind of failed.
It kind of sounds like there's some lessons to be learned for those of us in the United States that see the Spanish immigration and how many Spanish immigrants come and trying to force them to learn English.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You know, we have to respect their culture. We have to respect their preference for language. And if this planet could only learn that, we probably wouldn't have all these problems if you think about it.
I think it would help, definitely.
Doesn't matter because Google has their universal translator coming out.
Oh, there you go. AI is going to solve all that. Yeah.
It's largely out already, in fact, in that case. Ingemar Anderson has joined us this morning. And good morning, Ingemar. Love your morning shows. It's a great way to start my day. That's right. Ingemar comes to us from Seattle, and we just mentioned him once before. We'll mention again. He was on our show close to a month ago now, and his recently released book, The Future is Electric. Good read, quick read, and definitely recommend.
Mm-hmm. And we'd love to hear from you, Ingemar. How is the book selling, as it progresses, and where can people buy it? And we'll give it a plug as we move along. It looks like Niles is back with us from the Danish Genome Institute in Denmark. He says, good morning. Swaps may make sense for trucks, machines, and planes with non-structural batteries that need to get back in service quickly. Used in phones, cameras, and mopeds. You know, Niles, you make a good point there. We have a customer that was talking to us about electrifying a fire truck. And the concerns there were, you have drained your battery, you get back to the firehouse and another fire comes along and you haven't charged enough. What
Sure.
then? So that's a problem. And somebody else pointed out on our video that the Cybertruck would not be able to take advantage of any battery swapping because it's a structural pack. It's part of the frame.
Right. It's part of that exoskeleton
Exactly.
that the Cybertruck is using. That entire technology is different than what manufacturers do today for cars, because the cars today are endoskeletons. You have a frame that goes front to back, and then everything on the car bolts onto that frame.
Mm-hmm. So as I pointed out, to answer that comment on our video was, it probably is indicative of Tesla's direction. I don't think they're going to go back to doing battery swapping.
Yeah, I don't think they are either. Now, I've a very off the wall type of question. In nature, exoskeletons belong to like crustaceans, lobsters, crabs, etc. There are a lot of insects that have exoskeletons. So if I'm sitting in a Cybertruck, do I become a lobster tail?
That's a good question. Yeah. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do we have an opinion there? Not yet. It's too early in the morning. All right.
Yeah, I haven't had my Angie's Lobster yet.
Okay.
That's one of their favorite lunch places here. We have a lobster fast food joint around the corner here that somehow is able to give you a half a pound of lobster and a drink, even a coffee latte, right?
Yes.
And fries for $9.99. It's the exact opposite of where this economy is going, with inflation driving prices up. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and good lobster, too.
Yeah.
Don't forget those $4 breakfasts.
That too, yeah.
That's
with
right.
Massive amounts of bacon. Anyway, one of the advantages of living in Phoenix, you'll find those places once in a while.
Yes. Now, Niles has another comment for us as well. A YouTuber, Dr. Know-It-All, I think, landed a Musk interview just by asking him on Twitter. Now, Musk made the condition that it has to happen on Twitter. If he can, then you certainly can. We can at least ask, plus, of course, the
Yeah,
sunglasses.
he's going to have to wear sunglasses, and that may be a deal breaker,
Yeah, it might be. Hard to tell.
But, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I actually sent an email this morning to Franz and to Elon, and there is renewed interest now in the Roadster 2.0, as they call it, the new Tesla Roadster. And I said to Franz, I said, look, what more fitting place for you to describe and talk to us about this new Roadster than in the place that is servicing and maintaining your first-generation Roadsters? So we'll put you on a podcast, or we'll even buy your plane ticket, and we invite you here to spend a day with us. You'd love it here
By
with
all
all of the
means.
old Roadsters. So we'll see how they respond to that.
On YouTube, Fine Power Tools Sales West has a great question for us. How do you safely open a Roadster, Model S, Model 3, etc. motor drive battery, that's the high voltage battery, without damaging the case?
You know, Fine Power Tools actually had offered to provide us their version of a tool that they're developing. And we just haven't put closure to that yet, but we are definitely interested. We currently end up fabricating, and fortunately, we have a little machine shop over there, Gruber Motor Company, a Bridgeport mill and a lathe, and some big bandsaws and things like that, and welding equipment. We end up having to make tools to remove the lid off of these batteries. We're very interested in what kind of advances you have made in those tools, so feel free to reach out to us again. And if it was us that didn't respond, I apologize. Let's do it again, and I'll look for your email.
On YouTube, Ariam.jh, I hope I got that right.
Well, he tells you how to pronounce it
tells
later
me.
on in the comment there.
Yes.
Yeah, he's watching live.
Watching
Welcome.
live. Welcome. And it says, as it is, Ariam.jh. With an Irish accent. I don't know how to do Irish very well, but thank you for watching.
And then he says, "Here I am, JH," with an Irish accent. Yeah, exactly. Well, welcome. Yeah, from another part of the world. Instagram, a click outside. Do the tires and brakes wear out faster on these cars, meaning EVs, I'm assuming? Do you charge flat rate per hour for repairs? Okay, so let's take the first question. My biggest shock when I got my Tesla Roadster was that the rear tires lasted 6,000 miles.
Sure.
And the fundamental reason was I couldn't keep my foot off of the joy pedal. They don't call it a gas pedal anymore. Accelerator is a more technical term, I guess. But yeah, those tires wore out rapidly. And there's another ingredient with electric vehicles, which is wear in the opposite direction because of regenerative braking. So tires, of course, if you drive conservatively, you're probably not going to see what I did, and they'll last more than 6,000 miles. But yes, they do wear out more quickly.
You know, I've got a Model S that I drive as well, and I've seen on the Model S that with the non-EV tires that are now coming out, about 30,000 miles is the max.
That's it. Okay.
That's on the Model S that I drive has the air suspension, and one of the things I noticed with the air suspension is when the car drops, the back tires toe out a little bit, and it's always the back tires that wear out first. And it's always that inner edge of the back tires.
Sure.
So now for me, I do a lot of freeway driving to get to and from work. So what's happening is that I'm putting extra stress on the inner edge of those tires.
Interesting. You know, back in the day, the recommendation was find places that will give you a 40,000-mile warranty on your tires. You can't do that with a Roadster because you have a different sized wheel in the front and the back. It's 16 and 17 inch,
Right.
with a 17 in the rear. But with a Tesla Model S, you could. I think that the manufacturers probably got wise to that. They also have caveats. You have to do tire rotation at within a certain schedule in order to qualify for that 40,000 mile that warranty. But yeah, that's one of the minor downsides of an EV is that you're going to have a bit more tire wear.
Now, why don't you talk about the brakes as well?
Brakes, yes. We have a customer that works 65 miles from their home, work at Apple, and they live out in Avondale.
Okay.
And the last time he was in our service center, he had 140,000 miles on that Model S, and he still had original brakes. And they were still sound and could continue to be used. Once you learn to drive an EV that has regenerative braking, your brakes, the life extends almost exponentially because you're no longer using the brakes. In emergencies, quick stop, dog runs out in front of you, whatever, certainly. But if you anticipate that light, going red, and you start taking your foot off the accelerator, the car will begin to stop itself. And if you've learned to drive the car, brakes are really a secondary, option.
Yeah, in addition to the Tesla Model S, my wife and I bought a Volvo XC40 Recharge about 6 months ago, and that particular vehicle has true single pedal driving mode. And what that means is when you take your foot off the accelerator, the car is slowing down as though it is being, you are applying the brakes, but it's not. It's just the regenerative braking that's taking place, and it will slow all the way down to zero. And it will come to a stop, and then the brakes will engage and it will hold in place. So once we got used to the single pedal driving, I almost don't use the brakes on the Volvo.
Cool.
It's very cool.
The T0, there were only 3 of those made, and I won't go into the long story, but we had one of them in 2017. And it was way ahead of its time in a number of different categories. It had vehicle to grid, for example. It had adjustable regenerative braking. And when you dial that thing to max, I mean, the thing would really begin to stop, not quite like pressing a brake pedal, rapidly. But yes, it does make a difference, definitely. It looks like George has joined us. He's the one that uses the handle Rich Rebuilds. Watch Rich Rebuilds, and sent us an email a week or so ago and told us what his real name was, George. George, I did take your advice. Thank you for the email address. We've been trying to reach Rich Benoit, Rich Rebuilds, to join us on the podcast. And I did send him an email invitation, and I have not heard back yet. So, but thank you again for that additional information. And he says, sorry I'm late.
Well, good morning, George, and thanks for joining us anyway. On Instagram, A Click Outside has responded to our answer, says, thanks for doing this. Very informative. You're very much welcome. We're glad to be able to be of service.
And now we've got TikTok, Leaf Village Outcast, day 359 of asking, why do you guys wear sunglasses indoors? Well, I'll give you a little bit of a tip. Our podcast guest yesterday, and this is one of the benefits of being a podcast guest. We actually tell them why we're wearing sunglasses, and hopefully that will increase our audience or the the podcast possibilities. And we still are working on a video. I know it's day 359, but so far there's just so much intrigue and, I guess energy built up around this that it would be difficult for us to, remove all of that intrigue by giving away the real reason for.
Well, I mean, it's
this.
like popping a balloon. It's you lose the excitement. Although I want to acknowledge as well, we did see your question yesterday and weren't able to get to it because yesterday. Leaf Village Outcast said day 358 of asking.
And one other thing that's holding it up, and we need to go on record here, you see these sunglass cases, they're not selling yet. We need to be able to move some of these before we release this video, don't you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for the first 100 people who buy them, they're going to have the chance to get these Signature Series ones because this is going to be a limited edition. Otherwise, we will get the Gruber Motors ones. And for those people who decide they want to have their VIN number engraved onto the sunglass case, that's going to be an option as well.
Very cool stuff. So we've got a news item. The questions keep coming in, but let me squeeze in a few here. We were shocked to find that China really controls a lot of EV stuff these days. For example, 54% of electric car assembly is now done in China. And there was a statistic that was released just last quarter that China is now leading the nation in electric vehicle battery production, possessing a significant geopolitical advantage as a result. Despite massive investments from Western countries, they're lagging behind in mining rare minerals, training engineers, and building factories. They feel that China's dominance is expected to persist even by 2030, producing more than double the amount of batteries than the rest of the world combined.
That's amazing.
It is. So China does control quite a bit. It goes on and on in this article here, but the other interesting statistic was that the first quarter of this year, China actually took the lead in EV production.
Right. They produce, a little over 1 million vehicles,
Exactly.
and that's deliveries. That's not just production. That's actually sales and deliveries of over 1 million vehicles to their markets.
And when you look at the fact that they have one of the largest labor pools on the planet, and they've been investing this heavily in these types of technologies, I can't imagine that their lead is going to evaporate at any point.
While I don't think so, China was, let's face it, they were smart. They started 10, 15, maybe as much as 20 years ago at the beginning of this revolution, taking money that they had earned from manufacturing and selling to places like the United States, and investing that money in mines in places of the world that most of us in the Western world aren't really interested in, over in Central Africa and South America and places where there might be unstable government control. They also tend to have a little more of a stomach for the environmental issues that are coming up with mining. They don't
Yes.
really care as much about the type of environmental issues, or they have more lax laws, I guess is probably a more appropriate way to say it. So it puts them in a place to be able to do a lot of this production. The natural resources are not in China. That was one of the most surprising things that I found out. The vast majority of these resources are in South America and Africa and other places like that, where Chinese government-run companies have purchased land and purchased these facilities in places all over the world.
And the mining rights. Yeah.
Yeah, and the mining rights and mineral rights as well. My take on this is, China's forcing the world to play catch up. You guys know I have an IT background. I like to look back at history on things too. And I think back about 30 years ago to the early 90s. Microsoft absolutely dominated the software world. If Microsoft blessed your program, it could be successful. If they didn't like it and weren't willing to put it on their Windows platform, it wouldn't be successful. They put WordPerfect out of business simply by putting Word out there and making it highly compatible with Windows and not really cooperating with the people over at WordPerfect. So Google and open source simply changed the picture. Google said, okay, well, if Microsoft doesn't like us putting out stuff to run on their platform, we're just going to make stuff that runs independent of platform. If you run Unix, no big deal. You can run the same word processor that you're running on Windows, because it's going to run through our browser, and we're going to give away the browser for free. And then you have Firefox and Mozilla and other places that did like LibreOffice with their free Office alternative. And that really changed the game. Here in the EV battery space, scientists are looking at other alternatives besides lithium, like sodium-ion batteries. They're looking at making electrolyte out of 4 or 5 different combinations of salts, so that lithium salt is not the main salt for that electrolyte, that it's a combination of lithium and sodium and potassium and magnesium and a lot of different salts. And they're having a lot of success at this. That, to me, might be the way that China's stranglehold on this industry gets broken. Somebody's going to go in and change the rules.
Interesting. And you're right, they're not as regulation heavy as the rest of the world.
Right.
Definite
Here's
advantages.
a market share image. Just so people know, Windows is still...
Yeah, Windows is still massively large in market share even today. But you have choices. That's the big thing, is you didn't used to have choices, and now you do.
Right. Yep. It looks like Ingemar, the author of the book that we spoke about early, he says he sold around 100 of the Future is Electric books so far since May 1st. Excellent, Ingemar. Official book signing events are at Barnes & Noble, Saturday, May 27th, up in Seattle, I'm assuming. Other questions: how will the exoskeleton of the Cybertruck affect the safety of other cars in an accident?
That's a great question. I'm not sure exactly.
We don't know. Sounds like a video, guys. What do you think? Some research and a video there.
We'll just have to get a destructible Cybertruck and several other vehicles to destroy along with it, and we'll play around with it. We'll find out. We'll do the scientific method.
Seems like a no-brainer, yes. He says, are cars not supposed to have a crumple zone to not harm other road users? Good questions.
There's some really good questions in there that I don't know answers to yet. I'm not sure if there are answers to some of these questions yet. But I promise you, Ingemar, I'll do some more research. And Richard, if you can help me do some more research on automobile exoskeletons, this is not going to be just a Cybertruck thing, I don't think. Tesla is talking about eventually making all their vehicles with that exoskeleton manufacturing process. And I don't think they're alone in moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Automotive exoskeleton. There's nothing I'd be more happy to do research on than that, Mark.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
We have a commitment there. So Fine Power Tools is back with us. Fine Power Tools Sales West. He says, yep. He says, that's me. I'll reach out today. And as we promised, we will do a video and, report on how the tool is functioning, how it compares to doing it by hand like we're doing, and get you some visibility there.
Absolutely. And on YouTube, George from the Watch Rich Rebuilds channel has a question for us. He says, could I call you guys about my 2014 Model S stereo speakers not working? I think it's on the MCU board. It's a basic stereo. There's no amp under the steering column, nothing like that. So, yeah, I'd say at least give us a call and see what we can do to potentially help you guys.
Sure. Okay. He says, and regarding getting Rich to respond to us, he says, I'll text Rich now about getting back to you. Thank you, George. Appreciate it. As we did with Sandy Munro, when you get two companies that are virtually in the same space, collaborating and exchanging ideas for an audience like this, you've got a lot of magic and synergy. And what Rich Rebuilds has been doing is one of the pioneers with the Dolores Model S that was flood damaged. He inspired a lot of us out here to take that direction. And we have a lot to talk about. I think it'll be fun. It'll be well worth watching that episode.
I think it will be as well. Niles from the Bion Danish Genome Institute has a question for us. Richard, this is going to be another research question, I think. Did you look into the feasibility of the capacitor battery cache idea? It's an obvious thought, but since no one does it, there must be a good reason not to.
Yeah, we did not yet.
We have not yet. Even in the critical power space with UPSs, the power modules that run these UPSs will have a bank of capacitors on them. UPSs will have their banks of capacitors a lot of time if they're not modular but more component UPSs. So we have some background that we can look up and find out more about why there is not more capacitance or capacitor in automobiles.
Mm-hmm. Facebook, Mike Arnio asks, Cybertruck versus Aptera, ? They're distinctly different vehicles. First of all, let's point that out. One is addressing the pickup truck market where you can haul things around, and it just has a completely different look and feel than what trucks are what we're used to. The other day we were kind of joking, you've got the Dodge Ram, you've got the Toyota Tundra, and what were some of the other real manly names for pickup trucks?
Well, the GMC Sierra,
the Chevy Silverado, very westernized,
yes.
And then we have a Cybertruck, and it just didn't quite fit into the same genre. I'm going to go to Home Depot and pick up some lumber in my Cybertruck, but anyway, we're going to do a whole skit on that one of these days, right, guys? I think we're going to have fun with that.
Sure are. I'll wait till I get my canoe so I can pull up next to you in your Cybertruck.
That'll be even better, yeah. So Cybertruck versus Aptera. Aptera's claim to fame is it's a three-wheeler. It's registered as a motorcycle. And it is a solar car, which is a very exciting new direction for transportation. Now we're talking about dropping eventually the 1,000-pound battery pack that you're hauling around with you to get anywhere. Gas tanks don't wear anywhere, or they don't weigh anywhere near that. You know, probably have 100, 200 pounds in a full gas
Yeah,
tank.
at most, at most.
Yeah, but still, hauling stuff around doesn't make much sense if you can have photovoltaics give you energy while you're driving. So we're pretty excited about that whole concept. And, for now, Apteras do have batteries in them for storage because you're only good for 40 miles on that photovoltaic system that skirts the outside of the vehicle. But eventually, the power density will continue to improve, and we may not need to carry any storage method around with us anymore.
I think that'll be a great day when it comes, and I do think it's a when, not an if.
Mm-hmm. Instagram, we make 47. Welcome. He says, "Can I get a job with your company?" You know, anybody that wants to apply for Gruber Motor Company, it is ev@gruber.com. Feel free to send us your resume. We do on-the-job training. There aren't really any schools, plentiful anyway, that we can refer you to. But everyone that comes to work there grows, expands their skills. They move from strictly mechanical to working in electronics eventually. And it's a pretty exciting job. It's more than a job, it's a career. Let's put it that way, because the demand for those skills that we're evolving in the people that work with us are going to be in great demand. So you definitely have a career there.
We're already seeing that on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Then Hot Rails Rose says, "We have a 2014 Model S with 130,000 miles and original brakes. Not surprised. And thank you for joining us today."
Definitely, the brakes last a long time in those. Leaf Village Outcast says, "Plausible, LOL." I'm not sure which comment he's referring to, but speaking of the LOL comment, we should probably start mentioning that in this podcast. Rimac Nevera is a hypercar.
Oh, yes.
And the 0 to 60 on that is under 2 seconds. Maybe you have the stats there.
Yeah, the Rimac Nevera has the fastest production car 0 to 60 time in history at 1.74 seconds.
Okay, for a production car, as they...
it is for a production car. That's correct.
And someone pointed out, how can you, if you've produced 10 vehicles, which was their projection on this, call it a production car? It used to be that in order to get into NASCAR, you had to have at least 200 cars built or manufactured, homologation rules.
Sure.
But anyway, staying with that for a moment, 1.7 seconds. So what was your take on this, Mark?
Oh, I decided to go down the rabbit hole a little bit on this one. First, of course, wow, Wasn't it just a few months ago we were talking about whether or not a sub 2.0 time 0 to 60 would simply shred tires because tires were not physically capable of doing that? Well, obviously they are. Now we've seen 1.9, we've seen 1.8, now we're seeing 1.74. But I like to compare things to things that I can understand. In 2020, the overall 0 to 60 average time for a car that was manufactured was 7.8 seconds. So if you're driving around your 2020 Honda Accord, you're going to be somewhere between 8 and 10 seconds. If you're driving around your 2020 Corvette Stingray 7th generation, you're going to be around, maybe 4 or 4.5 seconds. When they all average out, you're going to be about 7.5 seconds. So the number of G's that you take when you mash the accelerator, over 7.8 seconds, you're going to take 0.35 G's. Okay. And then I thought, okay, well, let's go to a Roadster Sport. Wasn't that like 3.3 seconds or something like that in that range?
3.7, yeah.
3.7,
yeah.
Okay. If we went a little faster than that, 3.7, went to 3.3, you're going to take 0.83 Gs. So
Okay.
a lot more. If you go to the Tesla with ludicrous mode, Not the Plaid, mind you. The Plaid's a little bit faster, but your ludicrous mode Tesla, that's going to be about 2.5 seconds, 0 to 60. And your 1.09 Gs on that one. The Nevera is 1.74 seconds, of course, 1.57 Gs of force you're taking. And then I thought, okay, well, what does that really mean? Okay, I am, if you're 150 pounds in a Nevera and you get 1.57 Gs of force, it's about like a 235-pound person sitting on you.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Another good comparison is that 98% of driving that is done on U.S. roads today involves less than 0.3 Gs of force, being either negative when you're braking or positive when you're accelerating.
Right.
0.3 Gs of force is typically about the maximum you get when you slam on your brakes and try to stop hard.
Interesting.
So that to me, that gave me a little perspective. Dang, 0.3, I'm hitting the brakes as hard as I can. I'm lurching forward in the car, and I'm only taking 0.3 Gs negative. Here, or I'm slamming on the accelerator, and I'm taking, for me, because I have an EV, I'm taking less than 1 G of force. And for me, I'm bigger than 150 pounds, so it would be way more than 235 pounds of force sitting on my chest.
Amazing. And it's amazing also how rapidly things are changing. I remember going to the quarter mile strips, and if you actually were able to achieve a drag race car that was under 11 seconds, they would send you home if you didn't have a roll cage, and you were banned until you got one.
Yeah,
right?
okay, yeah.
Now you have these family sedans. You're not going to put a roll cage into a P90D Ludicrous or into a Plaid Model S. It's a grocery getter 4-door sedan, right? And I mean, these cars are under 10 seconds. Now this Rimac Nevera, the quarter mile was just over 8 seconds. So, I mean, we're getting into top fuel dragster territory eventually here if this keeps up. Now, the other thing that we had mentioned, what about safety issues? Fighter jets, for example, there are very strict rules regarding how many Gs we can subject people to because you get into blackout mode. In my case, when I was taking my P90D Ludicrous on a Sunday morning and opening it up on a nice stretch by my house there, I would get queasy before I went and got donuts and coffee. My stomach was empty, and from what you're saying, that was just over 1 G maybe. Right?
Yeah. You're only taking about 1 G of force.
Yeah. So what's going to happen as these G forces continue to increase? I think we're going to run into safety issues.
I do too, actually. Very, very much do too.
And then the other thing we talked about, we've got freeway on-ramps like they do everywhere in the U.S., and they're usually concrete walls on both sides, to prevent the noise from migrating into the neighborhoods. So you've got maybe 500 to 800 feet of concrete tunnel, basically. You get one of these supercars that can get up to 60 miles an hour before you even get past the tunnel. Then what? You start hitting traffic and you're not prepared for that. Maybe you're going too fast. So, I mean, the whole thing is a lot of fun. I'm enjoying it, but there are a lot of unanswered questions, it seems like.
Those people who like to drive crazy can really go crazy.
YouTube, Watch Rich Rebuilds. George again, he says, do you know if we can sell our reservation spot for the Cybertruck? I'm like 250,000 on the list. I've heard people, this will probably be an unofficial, sale. The real question is whether Tesla is going to check the original records and, deny someone that had bought one. We don't know that yet, but that's going to be a good question.
That is a good question. I think about, just like in the insurance world, you have Lloyd's of London that'll basically insure anything for the right price. I think this definitely could become an open market where people will sell their reservation spot for the right price. If there's a willing seller, there's a willing buyer. That's what Craigslist is all about.
Yeah, it's kind of like scalping tickets, outside the stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. So they may not like it. I can't imagine that it won't happen, at least some. Little Stinker on YouTube. has a comment about our sunglasses. The EV future is so bright that you have to wear shades.
That's one of our favorite comebacks.
That's a
little
great
sticker,
one.
Yeah.
And then False Hopes on TikTok says, our glasses are pressurized to keep our eyes from bulging out.
We've heard that one before, and also the fact that we may be aliens and we're trying to hide our eyes.
Right. You know, I think that's why Leaf Village said that it was plausible.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And then, of course, the fun ones are, the guys are hungover and they're trying to hide that.
Yeah, we haven't had that, although we've had people say that we try to catch a nap while we're on the podcast as well.
Mm-hmm. Which I actually did admit that I did do during the Tesla, the shareholders meeting.
Oh, that
months
investor
ago.
day.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
That was a rough one. That was almost 3 hours sitting here just watching a screen.
Hot Rails Rose on TikTok says, I read today where the new Roadster has been pushed back to 2024. We have a little bit of news on that, don't we?
Well, the news that I have, let me see if I can find that here, Mark.
Because I know that there is talk about it going back to 2024, and possibly even later than 2024. Not a guarantee, but definitely possible.
That was one of the reasons that we invited Franz von Holzhausen into our podcast so that we could get a little bit more information. I don't have the information here, but the exciting part about this long delay is that the car continues to improve the more it gets delayed.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Franz pointed out, and I'm paraphrasing here, that this delay has forced them to look at a number of different improvements that could be made to the car, and not just the SpaceX thruster, which, by the way, they are claiming will be the Rimac Nevera beater, and that was part of this cheeky comment that apparently Elon made on Twitter when he saw the comment from Rimac that they have the fastest production car, and his response to that was LOL.
Right.
But so sometimes waiting for something doesn't have a huge downside, especially if they're able to continue to improve it. And they have to improve it because since it was announced, so many additional cars are now coming out that are in that range, in that performance category.
Oh yeah, well that's the one that was announced at sub 2 second, and people all over the internet were talking about, oh, that's not possible because it's going to just shred the tires.
Right.
And now, not only does it not shred the tires, we found that out definitively. I do remember reading about it though, and Elon saying it's not a hard commitment. It's just his hope, but they do have an engineering team still working on the Roadster. One of the comments that he had made in the article that I read reminds me of something that he had talked to you about several years ago, when you were talking to Elon about doing stuff for the first generation Roadster. And he basically said, look, we like the car, but it just doesn't really move the needle.
Yeah, it was a bad time for him at that time because the Model 3 was not yet released.
Right.
And they were in production hell, as he terms it. And by that time, they had over 600,000 other cars on the road that needed attention. So here I am coming along with, at that time, what we felt was only 1,500 original Tesla Roadster owners. And he did share that, I've got a lot of other things to worry about at this point. Like over 500,000 cars already out there in production and trying to get the next generation car out.
Yeah. So, but he had confirmed. He says we've got an engineering team working on it. Mm-hmm. We love the idea of the Roadster, and he had said something. I'm paraphrasing here to the effect of that they hope to have the design done by the end of this year in 2023, and hope to have production getting started in 2024. But then he did definitely qualify it in saying this is not a commitment. This is just what I'm hoping happens.
Right. Yep. There was a caveat there.
So Hot Rails Rose from TikTok has come back and said, Montana is trying to pass a law to make TikTok illegal. Actually, Montana has passed a law to make TikTok illegal. And I can talk to my relatives that live in Montana, and that's quite a conversation.
Enforcement and implementation are two gigantic unknowns, but there is a movement. There's no doubt about that. YouTube Crunch to Grace Hopper says, like number 9, catching up, hit that thumb.
So hit that thumbs up. Thank you very much. And then on Sinclair Simons on Facebook has come to us as well. Says, I'm more than sure that the crumple zone, so he's talking about the Cybertruck and the exoskeleton, is built into a car so that it absorbs some of the energy, slows down the decelerating of the occupants in the car, and gives the seat belts and airbags time to work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a consideration of what other vehicle or object is out there. By the way, my last name is pronounced Singmans, not Simmons.
Oh, okay. Simans.
Simons.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you for updating us. The Tesla Roadster has a carbon fiber crash box in the front. And that's its function in life. It's to decelerate the occupants in the car and give things or give airbags and things like that time to work. Unfortunately, those crash boxes are no longer in production, and when these cars have front-end crumpling that takes place, there is no aftermarket product that you can insert in there. Some people are stitching them together and patching them, but yeah, there's definitely a nice crash box in the front of a Roadster.
On YouTube, Alex comes to us and says, in the future, do you see people being able to hack into their own Tesla cars legally? For instance, maybe install other games or any kind of homebrew software.
I could see that kind of like open source or for certain sections of the MCU. Now, as our guest yesterday mentioned, he was actually instrumental, he and a team, in making an open vehicle management system for the Tesla Roadster, and they tapped directly into the vehicle management system CAN bus. And there are 3 CAN buses that he mentioned. He said, we stay out of the power electronics module CAN bus because that has a lot of driving type controls. And you certainly wouldn't want a hack to go awry and affect your, speed, ability, braking, any of those things.
Right.
Any drive issues. It will probably be very restricted, but I could see where it would be to a manufacturer's advantage to do some open source for controls like that in the car, especially things like audio, for example.
Right. I could as well because, the Tesla's cars are built on the Linux operating system, like virtually all makes and models of cars that are manufactured today. And Linux is itself an open source platform.
Right.
So I could definitely see something like that in the future.
Just a side note, the other business that we're in, the critical power business, uninterruptible power systems, they also run on Linux. They're also open source.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that.
The firmware.
Ryan on YouTube has a comment for Niles from the Bion Danish Genome Institute. He says, batteries already have all the power and energy capabilities needed for normal EVs. Adding capacitors would be redundant and just unnecessarily add complexity and cost. My take on that one, Pete, is we continue to talk about batteries are not forever for these cars.
Right.
But some sort of alternative storage for a car to maybe get out of a garage or something like that is definitely going to be necessary even once we have the solar. There's going to need to be some sort of energy storage. Night driving is another one. So capacitors could serve that function very well.
Mm-hmm. Short-term storage like that, certainly.
Yeah, any kind of a short-term storage where a lot of energy is needed fairly quickly. So I still think that that's something that we want to research a little bit more. So we're definitely going to look at it.
Mm-hmm. We've got a picture, guys, of that Lotus car. Well, talking about Lotus, they made wonderful sports cars for many, many decades.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very unique design. They're very light. That's one of their claims to fame, and a fairly mature sports car design, which is what the Tesla Roadster was designed uses, which was the Lotus Elise. The They have not really built a lot of new cars recently, except for the Evija. And those of you that are familiar with that, it has holes on the side. It's 100% EV, and it's like that Rimac. It's a $2.2 million car. It's not going to be just the average grocery getter type car. But apparently, they have now introduced a Type 134 small SUV. It's an entry model, and it follows their Type 133 Saloons launch. This is 100% EV. They project that this car will eventually represent 50% of Lotus annual sales by 2028 to approximately 75,000 units per year in production. Now, Lotus was bought out by Geely. Geely, I believe, is an Australian company. They also own Candy in China. We were going to research that.
Yeah, I did do some research on it. Geely or Geely, however you pronounce it, is Chinese.
Oh, they are Chinese?
There, yep.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So it turns out that they are currently funding Lotus. The vehicle is under 5 meters long. It's comparable to the Polestar 4, and it's a contender for the upcoming Porsche Macan EV, sharing technology with the Lotus Eletre and Type 133. Have you ever noticed how all Lotus cars start with an E? That's probably another good research project. Why? We want to know why, But every Lotus starts with an E, and I think I used to know this story, and it was kind of interesting, but we'll talk about it in future podcasts and update you guys. So this Type 134 vehicle that you see up here apparently prioritizes aerodynamics for range and performance in a sleek, coupe-like roofline. This is the sales portion of the pitch here. It will be a significant part of Lotus's sales growth strategy and remain true to the company's core philosophy, as they say, of performance and driving dynamics. So it will retain the handling that you're used to in a Lotus, and it's not just an electrified SUV with a Lotus badge, but engineered from the start to feel and drive like a Lotus. So it should be a cool car when it comes out.
I definitely think it will be. I believe their quote unquote entry level price is still not what most people would think of as entry level. I think it's going to be up around the 100,000 range or a little bit higher than that. But that's a beautiful car, just a gorgeous car. I do think it's probably going to be end up being more of a Model X or maybe a high-end Model Y competitor if you want to compare it to what its competition in Tesla will be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very excited to see what it looks like when it comes out. On YouTube, Alex, actually Trucker Alistair, we've just gone through Alex's YouTube comment. Trucker Alistair says that talking about the theories behind the sunglasses, it's just all flat earth thinking.
Cool. Yeah, that's one way to put it.
And then George from the Watch Rich Rebuilds channel says, I can't see. I'm wearing sunglasses.
Okay, guys, and just so you know, we're at an hour and 13 minutes.
Okay. I've run out of news items here. We've talked about our video that's currently running out there on YouTube, gaining some momentum. If you're interested in battery swapping technologies, the pros and cons, and the potential future of that, it's a good video to watch. And it looks like Little Stinker just came in. He says the point of capacitors is to eliminate the charger. Capacitors charge extremely fast with direct DC. A simple current limiter is required to protect the DC source and its driving, wiring, and cabling. It's a good point. The similarities between capacitors and batteries are, one is it's a short-term storage device, capacitors. The other is a long-term storage device. Mm-hmm. And capacitors are used in electronic circuits to do filtering, especially when you're converting DC to AC and you're trying to create I'm sorry, the opposite, AC to DC, and you need a clean DC signal. AC, of course, is alternating current, and you're going up and down, and plus and minus is flipping around 60 times a second in the United States, 50 times in Europe.
Right.
And what capacitors do is when you put a diode to an AC signal, you now take only the upper portion of the waveform. If you have a full wave bridge rectifier, you have the upper and lower, but they're above the zero line, so you essentially end up with something like my hand is drawing here. And what you want for DC is a nice flat voltage level. So what the capacitor does is it fills in those dips to zero because it's got energy. So when you're at plus and it tries to go to zero because you're losing your sine wave, the capacitor discharges and fills in those gaps. And then you can do other things like put a choke in there and some more capacitors, and which will then even out the DC even more. But yeah, capacitors have been intriguing as far as energy storage with EVs, and there's a lot of research being done.
I think it's a fascinating type of thing, and it sounds like you're going to need to be one of our research subjects.
Yeah, probably.
And real quick, I'm going to pull up the image because I forgot to pull it up when you were talking about the stuff about China. So if you want to explain this.
Sure. Yeah, we've got that chart up there. Mark, you want to take a stab at that? You want me?
Absolutely. So China has 41% of the cobalt mining capacity in the world. This means when we were talking about the lack of natural resources that China is, most of that cobalt isn't in China. It's in mines in places like Central Africa and Congo and South America. They have almost 3/4 of the world's cobalt refining capacity. Now, the cathodes are made out of a lot of different materials. Cobalt and nickel and lithium are three of the main materials. That's why you see the CO, the Ni, and the Li. That's the positive portion of a battery. The anodes are made out of carbon, basically graphite. And it just so happens that China has a lot of the graphite mining capacity in the world, and they are able to produce graphite for roughly half the cost of virtually any European or American nation. So the United States and all Western European nations, for every $2 they spend to produce a kilogram of graphite, China only spends $1. As a result, China has about 2/3 of the world's battery cell assembly capacity, and that's why the article said that China produces typically more than 2 batteries for every 1 battery that everybody else combined in the world produces. And they have about 54% of the electric car assembly capabilities in the world. So the electric car assembly capabilities in the world for all other nations is less than what the assembly capabilities are of China by itself.
Interesting. One of my statistics that I have here is that China owns the majority of the Congo's cobalt mines. And like you were saying earlier, they had the foresight years ago to grab up this type of property and the mining rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Congo is one of those types of nations that Westerners have typically tried to avoid because they feel like, well, it's an unstable government and there's potential for government corruption and so on and so forth. China just went in and bought it instead. And they probably got it at a bargain rate as a result.
There are also some child labor issues in those countries.
Yes.
And working conditions. And again, it has to do with regulations, things that the rest of the world adheres to is not as prevalent in China. So
yeah, that definitely the lax attitude or lack of laws that are in China compared to what's in most of the rest of the industrialized world. While the industrialized world is alarmed at that oftentimes, what commentary is there? Because most of the rest of the industrialized world is now just going, hey, China, why don't you get all that stuff for us?
Right. Yeah, we'll let you do the dirty mining and extract it, and we'll just buy it from you.
Right. We do have from Niles from the Bion Danish Genome Institute. He says, wouldn't capacitors save on brakes, cooling, and battery decline as well? Kind of like a computer cache. I think it's possible. And Ryan's response, I think, as well, is the problem with capacitors is that they don't have nearly the energy capacity, ironically, of batteries. An EV battery has so many cells that they can easily discharge 1,000 amps or more, so that they are enough.
I think a fun job would be working in labs where you're researching stuff like this and coming
Yeah.
up with products. In my second life, that's probably what I would like to do. Well, it looks like we're wrapping up here, guys. Okay. Next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, remember that the podcast times are all 10 o'clock. We're starting to attract some guests, and we're thinking that Thursdays would be our guest appearances for the people that are interested in joining our podcast. We're reaching out to a couple people now. One of them will be Kyle Connor, who will be joining us in a podcast, and then Yehu Garcia, who a number of people in the audience recommended as a great guest for us because he's in a similar business and very knowledgeable with EVs and EV batteries. So stay tuned. We have another video, I believe, that we're working on, which has to do with a vehicle sale. And this one will blow your mind. This is a one-of vehicle. We won't give you too much detail here, but it's the only one on the planet like this. And we're going to be doing a lot of promotion and a video with that as well. A quick update. No one has asked, but the 3 Tesla Roadsters in China currently, the barn find Roadsters, it's still percolating, moving along. We've got a high bid of $750,000 for all 3, and the current owners are going to be there next week. We're probably going to end up with a FaceTime type video. We'll be able to guide them into continuing the archaeological dig with our guidance, and so there will be some more information. I asked, will they close bidding May 26th? And we're not sure yet. They are still committed to that date, but let's see how let's see how it goes next week.
Yeah, this is not like an auction site. It is truly just we're helping to put sellers together with buyers. So to that point, if the seller decides to change their mind, it's their prerogative to do so.
Exactly. We just get out of the way, and we're just matchmakers.
Yep, that's all we are at this point.
It's not like an auction site yet.
Okay,
Yes.
Jess. By the way, our social media team is continuing to improve the experience. We are even looking into providing a subcontractor network of photographers around the country. Oftentimes, these things sell because someone has taken exquisite pictures. We try to do that here when the vehicles are here being sold out of our service center. Our social media team gets involved in taking pictures. But as you know, things do sell better if you've got high-quality pictures of something.
By all means, the uniqueness of the picture definitely helps. Obviously, the uniqueness of a picture taken in a sea container for a car that's been abandoned for 13 years, that's definitely pretty unique.
It is. One final question that just came in, or comment. It's from Instagram, MintHill52K. He comes in from Vietnam. Welcome.
Welcome.
And he says, are you familiar with the VinFast EV? Yes, we are. We just haven't done anything with it yet. By the way, Kim Java, who's also one of the influencers on YouTube, who was on our podcast a couple of weeks ago or so, she actually has done VinFast reviews. So for those of you interested in getting a rundown on what those cars are about, she would be, or her videos would be a great one to take a look at. It's Kim Java on YouTube. So anyway, wrapping it up here, we appreciate you guys joining us. We'll continue to improve the production quality. We are getting to know all of you. We're on a first name basis with many of you now, and it's fun for us. So join us next week. We'll see you then.
We'll see you then. Thank you very much. And to Fine Power Tools Sales West, thank you for telling us that it's a great show.